do. Okay. Welcome to Friday Afternoon in the Manor Live with Dr. JJ. And here we gather on this wonderful Friday afternoon. Continuing, if you came in person, you could get pizza. So next time, remember to do that. And it's a lovely pizza too. And we have in the room a few people. And we have Reverend Dr. Gordon Postill, who's going to talk to us all about his remarkable book called. Now, it's interesting in our denomination, now we have a vocation assessment, which I won't tell you where I sit on whether one should have a vocation assessment, but another story for another day. I think I would have not passed the vocation assessment, but that's another story for another lifetime.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, well, there you go. And yeah, and so it's good. It's a great gift, and I'm going to just spotlight you, and we'll say 1 second spotlight for everyone, so we can see your bright, beautiful face. And over to you, Gordon, and look forward to hearing your story.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank JJ, the staff at Manor Road United Church for this invitation, and I feel greatly honored. And it's great to be with you. And as a matter of fact, where I grew up in Toronto at Bayview Avenue in Beloyal, although Manor Road wasn't just around the corner from me, it wasn't all that far away. My family actually went to Leaside United, but Manor Road I went to Morris Cody School, and I actually had a crush on a girl in public school who lived on Manor Road. So I actually walked by Manor Road United Church, sort of hoping that I might run into her. I don't think I ever did. So in any event, my book called A Longshot Story really began in 2010, although I was in great shape for a long time, physical shape, marathon runner, very fit, I was experiencing some fatigue and dizziness. And after a series of tests, I found out in the fall of 2010 that I'd had a defective aortic valve from birth. And the condition that I had usually resulted in people in their 50s and 60s having to have their aortic valve replaced. And so I actually had open heart surgery, which I never thought I'd have, in the middle of October 2010. And I also learned that they had discovered I had a very significantly sized aneurysm that could have burst at any time and killed me, years ago. So they were going to replace my aortic valve with a mechanical valve, and they were going to also repair the aneurysm. And that the aneurysm made the surgery a lot more complicated, and it was a higher risk. So on the night of the surgery, I really was reflecting about my life and really considering a lot of what I've been through earlier in my life. I could have very easily died a long time ago, and I would never have had the incredible life that I had without a lot of support from folks, a lot of people along the way extending their hand, generosity of spirit, and also my beautiful wife, Robin. And so I realized my life was blessed beyond measure. And if I should die on the table the next day, I was okay with that. I hope that didn't happen, but I'd had a great run. And while I survived the surgery, and I was because I was very physically fit otherwise, I returned to my full-time hospice job about 6 weeks later, and kind of like back to normal almost, although I think recovering from the surgery took probably about a year till I was really back to my baseline. But about 5 months later, I experienced this deep yearning to go back and visit a particular decade in my life, 1970 to 1980. And that decade really set the table in a way for how the rest of my life would evolve. And, it involved some pretty dark years, though, before things started to get better. Because in 1970, after what I call a deceitful, debauched romp at Queen's University, sort of slipping into what would become alcoholism, addiction, risky behavior, lack of a social conscience, any kind of conscience, no moral compass. I flunked out of Queen's. I left in 1970, and I thought I could still maybe get my life together, but I needed a place to hide. And I, quite a change going from Queen's University in Kingston to the nickel mines in Sudbury, where I worked for International Nickel, INCO. And, when I was there, things just continued to devolve. I did end up finishing my BA at Laurentian University. Very fortunate to do that. Left Sudbury eventually, came back to Toronto in 73, and just continued to slip into, looking back, what I would call unconscionable behavior. A friend of mine, a chartered accountant, told me in 76, and the only job that I could get after leaving the mines essentially was as a security guard, because my resume would have just been thrown out right away. But the University of Windsor was starting a program where you could go into you could get a Bachelor of Commerce degree within 1 year, a full year of courses. You could apply your liberal arts courses, and you would be able to get a Bachelor of Commerce degree in 1 year. And if you did another year, accelerated year, you could get an MBA. I had no interest in business whatsoever, but I thought, shit, I don't want to be a security guard for the rest of my life. And so I thought, I would go there. And it turned out that I was having a pretty good time. I was actually doing pretty well with my courses. But I knew that this was not for me after a few months. I came back to my furnished room in Windsor, of which I'd been in 1,000 furnished rooms. And I just needed a change. I was totally exhausted from writing a finance exam. And I happened to pick up a little Bible from Leaside United Church, given to me in 1958. So I was 10 years old. I was not aware of having this Bible with me. I certainly wasn't aware of having the Bible over the years because I had moved a lot. But for whatever reason, I had this little Bible, and I remembered that in the book of Revelation, there was a lot of great imagery, a lot of allegory, because I'd been a non-church goer for years. So I was looking to the Bible because I just wanted to change from any business materials. I was looking just for kind of like some literature, what I would consider literature. And so I just, started reading in the book of Revelation at the start. And, very soon, within a minute, maybe 2 minutes, whatever, all of a sudden, I was on my knees weeping. And I felt this sense of being loved, understood, cared for in a way that I had never felt in my life. And into my consciousness burst somehow, follow me, become a minister, which really give me a break here. But, you know, and the experience didn't last too long. And when it was over, you know, as I reflected about it, it just seemed totally bizarre, like way beyond the pale. But there was something about it that resonated within me. The next day, I quit the business program, even though I was actually doing pretty well. I returned to Toronto, told my mother and my friends that I had felt this call to ministry from Jesus Christ, and I was going to become a minister. And they were all like totally shocked, blown away. My mother actually became somewhat indignant, thinking that I had disgraced the family with my behavior over the years. And now I was going to disgrace Jesus and the church. And my friends pitied me. They really thought that I was desperate, you know, just clutching at straws. And so they were just totally, you know, they were not with me on this. And I really can't blame them, because I really didn't totally, I believed in it, but I really, you know, it was just too much for me to take in. But the bottom line is, I thought, you know, if I'm going to become a United Church minister, because that's all I knew, I looked at where there were seminaries, and there was a seminary in Toronto, Emmanuel College, my hometown. And I thought, well, if I'm going to give this a shot, at least I'll do it on my home turf. I got accepted into the Master's in Divinity program at Emmanuel College to begin the following year in September of 1977. But then the problem arose for me: where can I find a church to kind of endorse me as a candidate? Who could kind of, you know, sort of, in a sense, endorse me, support me? And that would be a problem, because who's going to support me? And I didn't want to go back to Leaside United Church. I just didn't want to have to tell them anything really about, you know, the rocky road that I'd been on. And I happened to be living, and I got another job as a security guard, which was right up in the Avenue Road, St. Clair area. And I happened to be living in, I found a furnished room, best furnished room I'd ever been in. And it happened to be on Russell Hill Road, you know, right at St. Clair. And, you know, going to work each day, I would actually walk by Timothy Eaton Memorial Church, you know, like, and I would sort of like marvel at that. I would even kind of look at the sign, you know, with the sermons and the clergy, and then one day I thought, you know, I could give them a phone call, and maybe they could refer me to some struggling outpost of a church that would maybe take a chance on a Longshot candidate like me. And so one morning, I called the church, and incredibly, the senior minister at the time, I did not know that, Dr. George Morrison, picked up the phone. I asked him, I explained my situation, and if he knew of a church that he could, you know, kind of refer me to. And he said, what are you doing this afternoon? And I said, well, you know, I live right around the corner. He said, just come over and tell the receptionist that Dr. Morrison is expecting you. The bottom line is, I met with this lovely gentleman. We had a great conversation. I didn't have to go into all the details, but he understood kind of my situation and a little bit about, you know, my past. He had me meet with a couple of his associates about a week later. And within a short period of time, he told me that he was going to have me meet with the session of the church, a committee of the session, and they were going to consider me as a candidate from Timothy Eaton. I mean, like, are you kidding me? Bottom line is, I met with the committee, and there was a period in the meeting where a gentleman who I greatly respect, a session member, asked some pointed questions like, why should we believe anything you're saying? Why should we support you? There's nothing here to show any sign of responsible behavior. And he was perfectly right. And so I had to really look within myself and kind of come to a point where, I know it sounds bizarre, but I believe in this call, and I ask for your support. However, I understand if that's not possible. And I stepped out of the room for about half an hour. They brought me back in, and they were going to recommend me to the session to be a candidate for the ministry from Timothy Eaton. And, quite incredible when you think about it. And so the bottom line is, I started, seminary in September of 1970. All of my peers in the class had a lot of connection with the church. Some were actually preaching at various points on the weekend, but they were all very up to date on the issues and theology and biblical scholarship. And Timothy Eaton, to kind of test me, my first assignment with them was to teach Sunday school to 11-year-old boys. Are you kidding me? So I'm there with some very a class full of responsible peers, great resumes, great track records, and I coming, with my past, and I'm a rookie Sunday school teacher. But in any event, I kind of got through that first year. I ended up getting sober in January. I knew that it was only a matter of time before, I would go on some, drunken, expletive-laced rant. I had a great, I met a great woman who I ended up being in a relationship for about 1.5 years with, who ironically, her father was a United Church minister. He actually had the same name, Gordon, too. But, a summer internship out in Saskatchewan, I got into therapy in my second year. Great, experiences, clinical pastoral education, Whitby Psychiatric Hospital, a wonderful internship, inner city field education internship with the Reverend Dr. Malcolm Finley right at St. Luke's United Church, right downtown, tough area, exposed me to a whole different life. So the bottom line was, here I was, all of this had happened. So after, the open heart surgery, I had this deep yearning to go back and revisit that decade because so much had happened. And I think in retrospect, I came to see after I'd done that this really truthful examination of my life, not only did it help me to, I had to face a lot of things that I really didn't want to look at about myself back then. And, I did, and, I was able to let go of some of that stuff. And I was also able to kind of commit to not slipping back into that kind of behavior. It also made me aware and deepen my gratitude for the many, many blessings that had come my way. Because, you know, Timothy Eaton Church, the woman that I was with, even my Sunday school class, my experiences in field education and clinical pastoral education. It just seemed that a lot of people came into my life, at just the perfect time when I needed them. And I want to make a clear point here. My spiritual awakening, when I consider my call to ministry from Jesus Christ, is not to be understood in any way like a born-again Christian call to ministry, where often in that theology, they have this call to ministry, they give their life to Jesus, and everything is good from there on in. That was not the case for me. It was a long road for me to begin to get healthy, to begin to develop a moral compass. But in any event, I wrote this story, what turned out to be a pretty polished draft of most of the book. And I wrote it for me. It was for me only. So I wrote it from the perspective of who I was at the time, and tried to be as candid and honest as I could, because I was writing it for me. My wife at the time, unfortunately, later on, she developed early onset Alzheimer's and has since died in January. But she saw every draft. Her name Robin. And so she would tell me like if something needed more work, or she would tell me like, gee, I think you nailed this section, because she knew the story pretty well. And then she told me when it was finished, you should make some copies for your sister. You should make some copies for a few friends, some family, a few colleagues. And so I did that. And everybody that read it, they enjoyed the read. They found the read worthwhile. But more importantly, they said that the way that I had written my story had sort of, in a sense, it had prompted them to look at their own lives and their own stories, and that I should really see about getting it published because it could help some folks. But for me, I really wasn't into that at the time. I felt that I had sort of like mission accomplished. So I put it in a drawer and never really thought about it after that until late 2019, as my wife's Alzheimer's was really accelerating. Our lifestyle had become pretty hunkered down. And so I had some time each day and I got the manuscript out and I looked at it. I remembered what people had told me. I made some revisions, kind of made the writing a little tighter. And I thought maybe I will get this published. But I really needed someone who didn't know me to read it. And actually a mentor of mine, Reverend Dr. Malcolm Finley, he's a good friend of the Reverend Dr. Malcolm Sinclair, who I had never met him, but I certainly knew of him. I mean, he's a very renowned, he's really gifted in so many ways. So Malcolm Finley, gave me the contact information for Malcolm Sinclair. And I called Malcolm in January of 2020, explained the situation, wondered if he'd have a look at the material. And he was so gracious, and he didn't want to accept any payment for it. And he said he was going to the cottage with his dog for a couple of weeks, and he would get back to me when he came back. So I sent the material off to him. The very next day, he called me. The very next day, he said he had started reading it, couldn't put it down. Whatever it took, I had to get it published, because he thought that it would inspire folks, especially folks who were kind of down on their luck. It would perhaps help some people to kind of look at their own lives, and maybe that kind of introspective process might prove enriching for them. And so once I got that feedback from Malcolm Sinclair, let's, kind of game on, let's do it. So I sent it off to a Canadian publishing company who have been outstanding, Friesen Press in Victoria, BC. They love the manuscript, but the manuscript ended in 1980, so it was about that decade, 1970, 1980, and I'm on a plane to begin my ministry out in beautiful Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, right next to the Cabot Trail. Are you kidding me? And the editor told me that in order to make the book complete, because she had got really invested in the story, it needed to be brought up to date. It needed an epilogue. And so in the summer of 2020, and my wife now is really becoming increasingly impaired, and my whole focus is on her well-being. I just didn't know if I'd be able to do that, but I was able to sort of tough it out over the next 2 or 3 months. And so I finished the book. The book ends in 2020, when we are next on the waiting list to come to this senior living community where Robin could go into memory care and I could be right close by in the independent living section. And I'm just so grateful the book ended then, because if I hadn't ended it then, I'm not even sure I would have been able to finish the book. But in essence, the book is really meant, it's certainly it's about Gordon Postill and Gordon Postill's story, but that is not the intent, that was underlying my motive for getting the book published. I decided to publish the book, with the hope that it could be inspiring, that it could be affirming for others, that it could prompt them to kind of look at their own lives, and that in a sense, my story could, perhaps like, what could it evoke and awaken and even induce within their own stories? And the remarkable thing is, it's early days, because the book was just published in September. But let's say there's been about 120 people that have read the book, many of who know me, but don't know me necessarily all that well. A few know me very well, but for the most part, their response has been, let's say we have a phone call after they've read the book. They call me from Toronto, or they call me from somewhere in the States, Florida. And, the first 10 minutes of the conversation are about, they love the book, worthwhile reading, they like the writing, the honesty, etc. But then, and here's the great thing about the book, is that the remainder of the conversation of maybe 30, 35 minutes is them talking about their own stories and how reading the book kind of prompted them to kind of look back at things they had forgotten about. They were able to remember people that had helped them at times of great vulnerability. Perhaps they recognized some behavior of theirs that they had kind of dismissed, but they were able to kind of go back and make amends within themselves about that. So that's really, that gives me a real sense of joy that, that the book has the potential. I hope whoever reads the book, it's a worthwhile read, and that's all well and good. But I really hope that it does more than that. And if it can help some people, if it can help pick someone up off the canvas, like Timothy Eaton did for me, and like so many other people did for me, if it can give some folks who are kind of desperately longing for a second chance, I'm all in. I'm all in. So I think I've been kind of rambling here, but I think at this point, let's, JJ, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gordon. It's been very interesting hearing your story. You reminded me of a couple of things. Actually, I was a youth minister at Timothy Eaton myself many years ago. And I came from also, I call it humble ministry origins. I guess I was a candidate of Alderwood United in Toronto. And
Wow.
Alderwood's a very different universe than many other United churches, as you may or may not know. But that being said, here we are. And now I'm going to first ask Ayla, do you have a question? Okay. And what about you, Gary?
I was interested in the addiction section. My partner's involved with a 12-step program, Food Addicts in Recovery, and he was concerned about your involvement with any of the 12-step programs.
Yes. Well, I feel for your partner, and I hope that he's able to get the support that he needs and the guidance that he needs. Actually, for me, and I was an alcoholic, and that was my drug of choice. But certainly LSD and hash oil, and then back then a lot wasn't known about Valium, and sort of thought of it as a little mother's little helper drug. But when I was working in the mines, I was working shift work, and a lot of the other miners, they had trouble. Like when you're working 3 shifts, they're changing every week. You really have a hard time sleeping. And so Valium was sort of the magic bullet for us. And we could get prescriptions very easy. And there was a great drug plan through Inco. And so, and for someone like me, like if 5 milligrams of Valium kind of gives me a nice little buzz, 10 milligrams or 15 milligrams or 20 milligrams, that's even better. And so I got pretty hooked on Valium. I didn't know it at the time until I came back to Toronto, was no longer working in the mines. And it was a very tough go coming off of Valium. But to get to your point, when I realized in January of, I quit drinking in January of '78, and I just toughed it out. I sort of toughed it out, but I knew that life was just too difficult to continue like that. And in the fall of my second year, I did go to a couple of AA meetings, but there was just something about them that it didn't work for me. But I know it works for a lot of people, the 12-step program. What really worked for me is I ended up having a great psychiatrist. When I was at Emmanuel, it was part of the University of Toronto. And so I started seeing this incredible psychiatrist in my second year, and I saw him right through until I left Emmanuel in my third year. I saw him once a week. And he really helped me to kind of get to some of the underlying issues, sort of systemic issues from my family of origin, and my fear of intimacy, my fear of commitment, all those kinds of things. Like for me, drugs of any kind, they help me feel at ease, because for a lot of my life, I was not at ease. And so, the 12-step program, I mean, it's literally saved millions of people. And I hope it does the same for your partner. And I appreciate your transparency.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did that help?
Yes. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed your story. A few years ago, the Toronto Star has a short story contest. So I submitted my short story, And it took place when I was 9 years old. And of course, it was family conflict.
Yes.
And as a 9-year-old, you see it in a certain way, but as an adult, you see it in a totally different way. So I had written it and I'd sent it to some of my cousins who were also involved, same age group. And my sister said, "Aren't you afraid of being sued?" I said, "It's the truth. Who's going to sue me?"
Yeah.
Never heard another word.
Well, that's what courage though, Gary. I really, that's inspiring. That's inspiring.
I entitled it Mimico 1949. That's where I grew up, and that was basically the year.
Wow.
Very different era for Mimico, but a different universe that was. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Gordon, what era? What if you could pick a particular decade in your life, one episode in that decade, what would be one that comes to mind for you? Like of the great journey you've been on.
Well, I think the most, in a sense, the most jarring episode was, in March of 1970. So I'm on the verge of, I'm just aware that my 3-year romp at Queens is on life support. And can I just read a little excerpt? It'll perhaps, so this is just from the prologue. I awoke one morning in late March 1970, terribly hungover. I couldn't recall much about the previous evening. Over the past several months, my alcoholic blackouts had become more frequent, yet this morning was different. I inexplicably began to honestly look at my life, something I hadn't done in ages. The result of this candid self-assessment quickly morphed into sheer torment, an insidious sense of doom, gradually seeping into my consciousness around the fringes over the past few weeks, now mercilessly bore down and enveloped me. I knew instinctively that my clever schemes and panoply of sensual pleasures could no longer shield me from the truth. My 3-year debauched, deceitful romp of endless thrills and delights was on life support. Brutal consequences were quickly heading my way. It would soon be time to pay the piper. I had been running up quite a tab. In short, I was fucked. After miraculously passing my first year, I was now on the verge of failing a second straight year at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Failing 1 year was bad enough. However, failing 2 consecutive years, especially for someone whose academic record from high school had earned him a covenant early acceptance from this renowned bastion of learning, was an entirely different kettle of fish. This kettle had the stench of a real loser. That loser was me. Without any twinge of personal accountability or conscience, I had squandered the opportunity for a first-rate education. Having been unexpectedly abandoned several months earlier by my first real love, a perversive heartache still shook me to the quick, leaving me emotionally paralyzed. My adolescent nemesis of feeling self-conscious, flawed outsider, surfaced stronger than ever. I had no sense of direction and had pretty much exhausted what should have been an abundant supply of cash. Everything was closing in on me. I felt ashamed, adrift, and afraid. My life lacked meaning. More to the point, I lacked meaning. Feeling trapped like a wounded animal, I desperately bolted outside to get some air. Aimlessly walking around for who knows how long, I eventually found myself down by Lake Ontario, where it abuts the campus. It was a cold, overcast, and windy day, and the big ice was breaking up. Chunks were flowing at a good speed, and a number of people had gathered on the shore to check out the sights. At some point, without any forethought, I left the shore and soon found myself impulsively jumping from ice floe to ice floe. As if on automatic pilot, I headed toward the fastest moving floes, about 300 feet further out in more open water. I lost my footing on the slippery chunks of ice several times and fell into the freezing water. Each time I struggled to climb back onto the floes, I cut my hands on the sharp edges. Riding the blocks of ice and looking back to the shore, I saw several people beckoning for my safe return. Totally unfazed and full of disdain, I defiantly kept going. I didn't give a shit whether I lived or died. After somehow making it back to shore, I had a sense of foreboding that this intimate brush with death had merely been a mild precursor of what lay ahead.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing.
Tough reading it.
That's a truly a miracle. Truly a miracle. Yes. Well, thank you, Gordon. And Ayla, any thoughts or? No? Okay. Thank you, Gordon. And it's been an honor. I look forward to. I'm going to have to purchase your book, definitely, and I look forward to that. And so we're going to look ahead and say thank you, Gordon, for this week. And then next week we have the Honourable MP Rob Oliphant, our MP from Tornadon Valley East, who's going to be bringing Canada. Where do we go from here? So thank you, everybody. It's a delight, and enjoy the wonderful weather that we're experiencing right now in Toronto. Blessings be with you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.